to hear from some of you. Thanks so much for sharing. We'll move into Nicole's presentation. And I was fortunate to have Nicole as part of my mentor group that I co-mentored with Chris, who many of you know. And Joe was part of our group, Zara, and I don't think Anne or others are here. But it was so fun traveling with Nicole through that training and then remaining colleagues. And now we're WhatsApp voice memo friends, leaving voice memos for each other every once in a while, long ones, multiple ones. And Nicole is one of those people who kind of can do everything and is good at everything. Everything's an exaggeration, of course, but you know what I mean. Like maybe on the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, it just seems like every faculty dimension arena of Nicole lights up a little bit, and she just has capacity in a lot of different areas. So she's very bright, but then is such a contemplative, creative person at heart. So for me, being friends with her and how she can combine that like really rigorous thinking and analytical thinking with the what feels like more spiritual or more intuitive or something is quite a unique combination. And so that's part of the gift she brings to this ministry. She has 16 plus years in missions, international fundraising, those missions agencies or groups that do really beautiful work but sometimes don't have the infrastructure or the systems in place to make it sustainable. She mentioned, what did she call it, the quiet cost of doing meaningful work without enough structure. That's something she learned in missions, which some of you can probably relate with. So she became really interested in what she calls the invisible work that makes meaningful work possible. So those systems, structures, infrastructures, things like that. So she's had lots of different roles, but is currently the operations director at a consultation startup. And she's really excited to launch this uh, kind of like coaching spiritual directors practice. So if you enjoy what you hear tonight, this morning, there's an opportunity to do private coaching or even more sessions with her. So we'll share those opportunities with you after that's done. So, welcome, Nicole. We're so excited to have you and for you to share with us.
Great. Thank you
It
so
looks good.
much. That
You're
was, oh
so
my gosh, what
welcome.
a beautiful intro. Well, and everyone knows that Vanessa is the most beautiful soul, and I'm sure you all agree with me. Let me bring up my screens real quick. Can you guys all see this okay?
That looks great.
Amazing. Okay, so I am very, very excited, and I was struck, Luke, by what you said too, of like, oh, well, spiritual direction is an art and it's a flow. So why are we talking about nuts and bolts? And as Vanessa said, I feel like there is this invisible work that is kind of the nuts and bolts. It's like the operations and how you set things up, like Linda, you were saying, as far as how do I make this more simple with, directees that are trying to schedule and maybe they cancel or they reschedule, and what about payment and all these different things. And so I hope that in this process tonight that you can hopefully walk away from the session with more clarity on those things and some really practical, tangible action steps you can take if you're in a season where you are building a practice, or that you can think ahead, if you are going to be building a practice in the future. But before we dive into everything, let me introduce just a little bit more. I wanted to show you guys some pictures of my family. It's my husband Pepe and my two daughters Camila and Brianna. And I'm a wife. I'm a mom of two girls. They are the joy of my life, and I think that's probably, out of all the different hats that I wear, it's my favorite, is being a mom. And yeah, we love adventure. We love going outside. We love hiking, but also cozying up, watching a good movie, and eating some homemade dessert. I love to bake also. And so that's our family. And as Vanessa mentioned, I am a trained spiritual director, and that was one of the greatest gifts of my life was being able to go through Center Quest and be able to be trained as a spiritual director. And I'm also an operations director. And it was interesting because I feel like I've been on a journey over several years of like, how do these two connect? They did feel kind of separate. And what does that look like? And I do feel like I found a gap between, the work of spiritual direction, but then also like, how do you set it up in a way that's sustainable and that's, the systems that they're simple, but that they help you become more present to the people that you're companioning. And so that's kind of what led me to this. And I hope to bring both those worlds together, the contemplative side of things and then also the operational side of things. And I will say I'm really excited about this opportunity. And this is kind of the first time I'm presenting this material in this way. And so I also want to learn from you guys if there are things that I'm sharing that you don't feel like they resonate or that are confusing. I'll definitely be paying attention. You feel free to put things in the comments or to give feedback at the end as well. I would love to learn from you all and to see kind of if it lands. Um, all right, so the way that I'm approaching this is that when you build a spiritual direction practice, and this was my experience because I did kind of build and launch my own spiritual direction practice. I believe that there are 6 pillars that really help strengthen your practice. And so today, what we're going to be doing is I'm going to go through them all one by one. I'll give a little introduction to what each of those means. And then I'm going to provide some questions for you to ponder. And then each pillar will have a little exercise for you to do. And I'm sure that I'm probably going to run out of time because I'm really excited about all this. And so if we get to the exercises and we're getting a little bit tight on time, I'll just, encourage you guys to take them with you as homework to ponder on and to work through. At the end, I'll have the link to download a guide as well that also has these questions. And so if you aren't able to write everything down or if you're not able to kind of capture everything, don't worry, you'll have resources after the fact as well. And I believe you guys will all receive the recording. Is that right, Vanessa? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if there's anything
Yes.
that you want to go back to and listen to, you'll have the recording as well. But my goal is that you would walk away from the session today with greater clarity about where you are, about where you're going, and a couple areas where you can put your focus next and work on in the coming weeks. So let's dive into number 1, discernment. And this is all about clarity about your season, your values, and the scope of what you want to offer. Now, when I say discernment, I'm sure that all of you have thought long and hard about, your calling and how it is that you want to show up in this ministry and how God is calling you into this work. And so it's not discernment from the sense of like, oh, am I called to this work or things like that? It's more about like, okay, what is the season that I'm in and how will that shape what my spiritual direction practice will look like? I would think that as you're building, or a lot of you probably have spiritual direction practices, you likely have a sense or know quite clearly like who are the kinds of people that you're drawn to serve, or the environments where you feel most alive, or the values that shape your presence as a director. And so when I talk about discernment, it's not coming from a place of starting from scratch, but it's more about alignment. And kind of answering the question, is the way you're building your practice aligned with your values and your season? And so, for example, let's say, it's really important to you, like depth in your sessions and like feeling really spacious in your sessions. So if that's important to you, but then you're structuring your sessions that they're kind of like back to back and you don't have space in between your sessions, then that's a misalignment in, with your values and how you're wanting to show up. Or maybe you feel called to serve pastors, but the places where you're building relationships and your networking is more with lay people in the congregation that are in business or in the entrepreneurial space. And so that's a misalignment. Maybe you really value flexibility because of your family season, but then the way that you're trying to build your practice is like you're building it in a way that you're wanting it to kind of become full time. And so if there's not an alignment with the flexibility that you have with your time. And so what I want to invite you to think about in this stage of discernment is what season of life am I actually in? who do I feel genuinely drawn to serve? And how big or complex do I truly want this practice to become? And sometimes when we ponder these questions, we can feel some tension because maybe we're experiencing competing desires. Maybe we want flexibility in our practice, but we also want the stability of the income that comes with having more directees. Maybe, we're looking to have clarity before we act or before we build something. But I do want to encourage you, at least from my perspective and how I felt when I was launching a practice, I felt like I had to have all the answers to all the things before I really like launched. And I did want to encourage you to say, like, it's easy to feel paralyzed because it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much and I don't know what to do or where to start with. And I do want to encourage you to just take a step. You will refine who you want to serve by serving and seeing like where it is that you feel resonates the most and how you want to show up for people. You'll refine like the people that you're serving by who shows up to the things that you offer, and I think over time you'll be able to see themes emerge and you'll be able to feel where you feel most drawn. And I wanted to give an example of this for discernment. So as Vanessa mentioned, I worked for 16 years for a missions organization in Mexico. And through a series of events, we made the decision to transition out of ministry and come to the States. And that was right as I was finishing up my practice training to be a spiritual director. And I wanted to launch a practice, and my goal was that it would become a full-time thing. And it was interesting because I was in that as I was in that process of discernment about what this looks like and trying to, put my services out there and see who was interested. I felt like there was a misalignment. And because all of the work that I had done in missions was self-fundraised, my husband and I, we needed to, itinerate at churches and raise our own funds. I felt like I really wanted the stability of like getting a part-time job and then being able to build my practice kind of part-time where I didn't feel the pressure that I had to have all the income coming from directees. And so that felt aligned with my season of life that I was kind of burned out from our transition out of missions. And I wanted to offer this, but I didn't want to feel the pressure that I needed fully my income from that. And so that's just an example of a way that I was able to align my values, what I was experiencing in that season with my desire to build a spiritual direction practice without that pressure. And so, I think discerning this will help you in our next step of setting up the foundation of your practice. For example, if you're meeting with 3 directees a month, then you don't need complex systems. It can be very simple and straightforward. But if you're wanting it to grow bigger, then there are things that we can do to make that more sustainable. And so here is our first exercise. And this is, I'm calling it the season snapshot. And I know this is a lot to write. Let me put this in. Oh, I should have done this where I could put it in the chat. Well, I know you guys will be able to watch this recording later, so you don't have to like write everything down. But even if you just kind of write what's in the blanks, and then with the guide, you can have the full question later. But I'll give a minute, and I would like to invite you to write down, in this season, how many hours do I realistically have to offer for spiritual direction? And then how do you want your practice to feel? If you could name one emotion, like how do you want your practice in general to feel? Are you looking for this to be a primary income? Maybe bivocational, maybe it's supplemental, or maybe it's just something that's a passion of yours that you want to offer as a ministry. And I know this is a hard question, but what would enough look like? If there's like a number that you need to sustain what you're looking to build, what would that look like? And for some of us, even writing down a number can feel uncomfortable, and that's okay. If it does, notice what you're feeling. And so I'll give a minute for that. And I will say too, you may not know the answer to these questions. And so just kind of like the first thing that comes to mind, don't overthink it. All right. I know you may not have had time to completely answer everything. For the sake of time, I'll move on, but feel free to come back. And like I said, we'll have the questions at the end as well. Now, for what you did write down, I'd like to invite you to notice if what you've written there matches what you've thought about of what you want to build or what you've been building. And if there's a little tension there or a misalignment, then that is great information that you can notice and work with. Now, as we close this pillar, the outcome of discernment isn't like the perfect niche of who you're going to serve or a 5-year plan. It's simply clarity about your season, about your values, and the scope of the practice that you're choosing so that everything that you build from here is aligned. Because when you're aligned, then sustainability becomes possible in your practice. All right. And you guys can let me know in the chat if I'm moving too fast, but I do want to get through all the pillars in our time today. So I'm going to go on to number 2. And this is probably where we'll spend the most time and probably where there's the most questions. Foundation is the structures that hold your practice. So in discernment, we talked about clarifying your season and clarifying your scope. And now we're going to talk about building the container that matches that. What structures need to be in place to hold this practice? And it doesn't need to be elaborate systems. It doesn't need to be, advanced operations, things like that, but just a solid foundation. And feel free, especially in this section, as you have questions, as Vanessa said, we'll wait till the end to answer questions. We'll have a Q&A time, but as we go through, feel free to drop anything in the chat. So and you can let me know in the chat if there's something I'm missing, but from my perspective, every sustainable spiritual direction practice needs a minimum viable structure. And at the most basic level, you'll need 6 things: a way for people to find you, a way to book a session, a clear covenant or agreement on how you'll work together, a simple intake process, a way to receive payment, and a platform or place to meet, whether that's Zoom, whether that's in person, an office, whatever that looks like. And if these things are clear and functional, you have a strong foundation for your practice. We could do, Vanessa, too. I could send out this deck as a PDF at the end as well. So you don't have to worry about taking
Nice.
pictures and you'll get the whole deck.
Nice.
So where I often see strain in building a business is in 2 directions. Sometimes we overbuild before we're even seeing directees. We're pouring energy into websites and systems before we have anything consistent. And sometimes that feels safer than simply beginning and kind of putting ourselves out there, or maybe we underbuild. Maybe, we're having 10 directees and we're emailing back and forth to schedule. Maybe we're clarifying expectations, each time. Maybe we're avoiding clear payment structures, or we feel awkward about putting structure in place because it feels like it's not spiritual, like that like Luke said, like that it doesn't go along with the flow or the art of spiritual direction. And, neither of these are sustainable. And the goal is not for things to be complicated or complex or to feel clunky, The goal is to help, or for these things to help you feel stable. And when you have a structure in place for your practice, it's going to protect your time, it'll protect your emotional energy, your clarity, your financial sustainability. And again, like I said before, your season matters. And so if you're meeting with 3 directees a month, your structure can be simple and mostly manual. If you're seeing maybe 10 or more clients a week or even a month, having a strong foundation becomes essential, because the more directees you have, the more complex it'll be. And you'll worry about, oh, I forgot this, or, this person hasn't sent me payment. Do I say something, and so structure becomes a gift that protects both you and the person that you're serving. Because when your systems are clear, then you can show up to your directees fully present and not distracted, by people that haven't paid, or, oh, did we get the right time? And, the time difference, oh, shoot, we missed, and I thought it was an hour earlier. If you're not worrying about those things, then you can be fully present with the person that you're meeting with. Now, one of the questions that anxiety can show up can come around like these questions about starting a business. And I'm not sure in the States, there's something called an LLC for like registering your business. I don't know what that is in your country, but do I need insurance? Do I need to register as a business? What about taxes? How much should I charge? How should I charge? Do I even have permission to charge as, for something that I see as a calling? And the list goes on. And the way that I want to approach this is not necessarily saying like, oh, yes or no, because it'll be so dependent on your situation. I want to I want to offer you kind of how I view this through a different lens. And so the way that I think about it is that there are tiers, like phases of structure, depending on how complex your practices, depending on how many people you're seeing, depending on how big you want it to get, how much this is a full-time, income for you, or if it's something part-time. And so when you're in the early stage, I'll call it tier one, this is basic and it's functional, but it has everything that you need. It has a covenant. And for example, in your covenant, it can do a lot. Maybe it's not just an agreement on your working relationship. It should also address confidentiality. What happens if someone cancels or doesn't show up? And if you don't have those yet in your agreement or in your covenant, that's an easy fix. You have a way to schedule with people and a way to meet. Maybe that's just you email back and forth to schedule. Maybe that's on a scheduling platform, but you have a way that you schedule, a way to receive payment. I would say that no matter what level you're at, I would encourage you to have a separate bank account for any income that comes in for spiritual direction so that it's not getting mixed up with your personal finances. And, even just in a Google spreadsheet or on a piece of paper, even to kind of track the income that's coming in and then any business expenses that you would have. Um, and having simple records now can prevent a big headache later, depending on how big it grows. Also, it's really important to have some system or make some decisions around how you store any notes you might take, how you protect confidentiality with what people share with you. And then finally, basic visibility, like how are people going to find you? And we're going to talk about that a lot more. There's a whole pillar dedicated to visibility, but these are kind of the basic functional things to start and maintain a practice. And a lot of people stay right there. They don't end up growing bigger than that. For the next tier, if you're looking to make it more of a full-time thing, tier two is about formalizing. And it usually becomes relevant maybe when income is coming in more consistently, maybe when you're seeing more people, you might consider getting a professional email address, maybe putting liability insurance in place, creating a more robust kind of like, oh, here are like the the policies of like, oh, okay, if someone cancels or doesn't show or different things like that, like different policies. This is where it might be helpful to talk with a local tax professional and to say, hey, how should I, set up my accounts in this, and how should I handle business expenses and things of that nature, like if you're renting an office space or things like that. Um, and I will make a note, I would be interested to hear from other people in the group as far and also globally, I'm not sure, but I would say that insurance, maybe it's tier one, maybe it's tier two. If you're just beginning with people, well inside your faith community, you probably have more leeway there. But if you're seeing people outside of your network as you're charging, or if you're working with anyone in significant emotional distress, especially in the States, I would say probably don't wait. Like it's not expensive and it will protect both you and the people you serve. I don't know if that's as big of a need outside of the United States. So that's just something I'll put out there. And then for tier three, I would say, this is definitely not the goal for everyone, but if you want it to become like a full-time, professional practice, then that'll be, okay, you'll have a formal entity, maybe a space that you are renting out full time, maybe an accountant doing books for you, more developed systems, having a really formalized supervision structure. But a lot of people don't, don't want to get to that point. So, and it might feel overwhelming too. So like that's all, like that is an option if you want to get there, but that's not something that you have to move towards. None of this is like some, it's not like a goal that you're moving towards. It's just like, oh, if you want that, those are things available to you. And here's this is something that are some simple tools to get started because there's like the, oh, what are we doing? And then here is a list. And like I said, you don't have to take a picture of this or write it down. You'll receive this, but just some simple systems, like some tools that could help you as you get started. All of these platforms are free. For example, I know one of the questions, Linda, you mentioned around scheduling. There's a couple different services that, like Calendly, Calendar is another one that I've used that it's free. You can connect it to like a Google Calendar and then people can book on your link and then they can even reschedule and you don't have to be back and forth. So it just does all of that automatically. People maybe that you're meeting with in a different time zone, like they'll see the appointment in their time zone. And so you don't have to worry about, oh, we got, our times wrong or things like that. So that's for scheduling. Google Docs is a great resource for creating an agreement to send over to people to sign. Squarespace, if you're wanting to build a website, Squarespace is a great option for building a website, or the Spiritual Directors International Directory for intake, for bookkeeping, there's different options here. And yeah, I know I could we could talk about this for a long time. I know we need to keep moving, but you'll get this and I can answer any questions about these at the end as well. I will say something that I struggled with when I was starting a spiritual direction practice is the comparison trap. A lot of times the struggle that we face is because we're trying to do things like outside of the season that we're in. Um, and so maybe we look at what someone else is doing and we feel like we're behind. Or maybe if we feel like, oh, like I want this to become something bigger, but that feels somehow unspiritual, or maybe it's too ambitious for someone, that's wanting to do this as a ministry. I can't like want it to become something bigger. And so, I just wanted to encourage you, the only important question for you to answer for yourself is, does the structure I have and the structure I'm building, does it match the practice that I actually have, and the season that I'm actually in, and to not compare because other people are in different seasons and they have different levels of capacity. And so, not to compare yourself to maybe someone else's middle, to not compare your beginning to someone else's middle. And so, anyway, just wanted to throw that in as an encouragement that you're exactly where you need to be, and there is a wealth of opportunity. Now, for this one, this will be especially helpful for those that are already seeing directees. If you're not there yet, then you don't need to worry about this. But I want to invite you to take a piece of paper and to map out, just kind of do a little sketch of like, okay, what does a directee, I meant not client, I meant to put directee, what does that flow look like from when they contact you to when you have a session? And so I'll give you an example. Like, I don't know if you can see this, here's my client flow. People can find me on my website and they download a guide and then they can get on a call, like a consultation call, and then they can schedule on my link to set up an appointment. And so to just kind of map out like, okay, what is the way that people find you? How do they reach out? How do they schedule? And just kind of what the steps are in there. So I'll give you a minute for that, for those that are seeing directees. All right. I apologize. I wish we had more time for the different exercises, but we're going to move on. I'd like to invite you to look at what you mapped and ask yourself, what area feels fuzzy? Like what area feels like there's maybe tension there, or maybe that it feels weakest. And you don't need to fix it today, but just identify like, oh, at what point in the process do things feel like a little clunky, a little like that they're not smooth. And as we said before, noticing is always the first step, in spiritual direction and in building a practice. And um, and I'm hoping that that's like whatever you identified is something you can take out of our time today to give some attention to. Now, I before we move on, I want to name something that kind of sits above like the tiers and the structure and all of that kind of stuff, and that's your practice philosophy. As you see more people, you'll start to develop a sense of how you work. Are you someone that likes to assign reflective exercises to your directees in between your sessions? Or, are you anti, homework? You're like, okay, whatever, we show up with, is it how do you handle a directee that brings something outside of the scope that you feel like you can serve them with? What are your boundaries around contact between sessions? How do you handle dual relationships? Those types of things, like this is called, I would consider that like your practice philosophy. And it's not something that you figure out all at once. It's something that emerges over time through experience, through supervision, through paying attention. And, that's not something that we can really go into today. And it's so deeply personal and has to be shaped by your values, your faith tradition, your own formation. But I do want to just acknowledge that and that it's worth being intentional about too, that there is like a philosophy that you'll end up developing that will help guide the decisions that you make and how you approach the work. And I feel like people that are directors, that are able to stay sustainable long term have done some of that thinking and made some choices and set up their practice in a way that is aligned, with their philosophy and the way that they want to show up for people. I hope that makes sense. Um, all right. So to close out the foundation, when your structure is clear and it's aligned with your season, your practice feels lighter to carry. And it's something that can hold you as you hold others. And that's what we're trying to build, something that can hold you as you provide space for others. All right. Now I'm going to move a little bit quicker through the next ones. The next one we're going to talk about is compensation, financial clarity with confidence. Now, I feel like a lot of spiritual directors, myself included, arrive at this question and it feels heavy. It feels complicated and probably heavier than it needs to be. If money feels complicated in the context of our work as spiritual directors, you're not alone in feeling that way, and you're not wrong for feeling that way. Many of us feel this way because spiritual direction is holding sacred space. And when you talk about money, that can feel transactional. And so it just kind of feels like it doesn't align. But if we're looking to create practices that are sustainable, then that requires clarity. And if your practice can't support your financial needs, then it's eventually going to create tension with you and in the life that you're building. And so I kind of want to shift the question instead of asking like, what should I charge? What feels good to charge? All of those things, to ask the question, what is the income or what's the money that this practice needs to generate to provide sustainability in the season that I'm in? Like what are the financial needs that I have? And the answer will be different depending on what you're building. Is this a primary income? Is this bivocational? Which it was in my case. I'm working part-time. I was working as a virtual assistant and then offering spiritual direction part-time. Maybe some are retired and it doesn't need to produce that much income. Or maybe some are offering it as a ministry and they just say, okay, if you want to donate something, then that's okay, but there's no like cost, a specific cost associated with it. And there is no wrong way to approach compensation. But I do invite you to just be honest about what it is, that you need and what your situation is. And I would say money is not opposed to ministry. They're not like two different things, but money is allowing you to do your ministry. Now, a practice that's like draining you is not more holy, it's not more effective, it's just less sustainable. And so my hope is that I can help offer maybe a perspective shift. Um, because I feel like a lot of times, when we talk about money and we talk about numbers, it's not even as much about the money, but it's about our mindset and how we approach it. And so before we talk about the numbers though, let's get honest about what this practice actually is for you right now. And here's a couple of questions that might help guide this conversation. Is this business a ministry or a hybrid, or a business? Or is this a business, a ministry, or a hybrid? How much time am I realistically willing to give to this or able to give to this? And what income, if any, does this ministry need to produce? And when I think about a sustainable practice, we're not looking about at like making it profitable. You know what I mean? We're just looking at like, okay, what's going to allow me to stay present with my directees and not just today, but also 5 years from now. All right, let's make this practical. So here's our exercise, and we're just going to do a little math. And so there's 3 questions. One is, what is the maximum number of directees that I think I can sustainably hold? How often would I meet with them? And I know typically for spiritual direction, it's monthly. Um, and then realistically, how many sessions per week would I be able to give? And with that, it's a simple math equation where you say, okay, how many sessions per week? What would be kind of the fee or the cost or the price of a session, times that many weeks a month, and that would be your monthly income potential. Like that's how much you could earn a month. And so I'll give you a minute to write that down. All right. Now, like I said, you may not have had time to fully flesh that out, but I want you to pause. And when you look at kind of the monthly income potential, to ask yourself, is that aligned with kind of the financial needs that you have? Does that match the time capacity that you have? And if not, what are the things that you might look at adjusting? Maybe the pricing needs to be adjusted a little bit. Maybe the volume of like how many people you're able to meet with, or maybe, the expectations around what this can produce and what that's going to provide for you. And also, I just want to encourage you to set the math aside for a moment and notice, what comes up for you emotionally as you look at that number. What does it feel like in your body and in your mind? And however you're reacting, it's information. A lot of times, um, the way that we interact with money needs more attention than the money itself. A lot of times the math is simpler than we expect, but it's our relationship with that math, that we need to give some attention to or do some work on. And so, I will say, especially in spiritual direction, I struggled with this. Maybe no one else did or does. But I really struggled with undercharging of like, oh, I can't, um, like like that it felt like I wasn't being humble or generous enough to charge what I actually needed in that season. And so, unfortunately, though, if you don't charge enough to cover what you're needing to cover in that season, it's going to create a tension because you're going to be feeling like, oh, I have to have more directees to get the income that I need, and it's just going to create this misalignment. And so, that's not good for you or for the people that you companion. And so, I think there's yeah, an invitation to discern here, what is it that you need in this season, and what does that look like to offer that, and to not feel ashamed about that, to feel confident in what you're needing to sustain your practice, and that's going to be individual. And I think compensation is all about charging in a way that allows you to sustain your calling, like we just talked about. If this is something that's supplemental, it's something that doesn't need to be a primary income, then your numbers will reflect that. If this is primary income, then your structure and your numbers need to reflect that for it to be sustainable. And when you have clarity around what you need, then that reduces the guilt that you feel about charging. It also reduces burnout because if you have, the income to actually sustain your practice, then you're going to be able to last. You'll have longevity. And it reduces any resentment that might come up if you're constantly undercharging. And if you're clear about compensation, about how people pay you and what your approach is around it, then you don't have to carry that question into the room with the directees. You can just be present to whatever is happening in that moment. All right, I want to have time for Q&A, and so I'll kind of move a little bit quicker through the next ones. It should just take a few minutes, but I just want you to be thinking about them um, as you're building a practice. I think the the discernment piece about your calling, and then all, or not the call your calling, but like the season that you're in, the foundational structures, and then the compensation. I think those are three really big ones in building a practice. But let me go ahead and move quickly through visibility. Now, visibility is all about helping people find you. You've clarified your season, you've worked on building the container, and now, the people that you feel called to serve need to be able to find you. Visibility is all about becoming accessible. If people don't know that you exist, if people don't know what you're offering, how are they going to, you know, find you and to sit with you and to work with you? I do feel like this is another one, at least for me. I don't know if anyone else feels this way, that it kind of created some anxiety because being visible, another way to talk about it would be marketing. It can feel self-promoting. It can feel inauthentic. It can feel businessy. It can feel salesy, and it can feel uncomfortable to like put yourself out there. And you're not alone in feeling that way. But I would invite you to think about it a different way, that visibility or marketing, it's just all about making yourself findable to people who are already looking for what you're offering. Visibility is not about performance, it's about invitation. An invitation simply says, oh, this space exists. And if this space and what I'm offering resonates with you, then you're welcome. Like you're welcome to meet with me. You're welcome to have this space where you can discern what God's doing in your life, and you're welcome here. That's not self-promotion. That's just being faithful to the calling that God has put on your life to offer this ministry. And I will say too, there is no single right path for visibility, for marketing. This can look like um, uh, word of mouth, or really quick, I'll just say this, like the goal isn't like being everywhere all the time, being on all the social media and on the blogs, on the website, or, all the things. It's just like what's right sized for what you're looking to build, just enough that the people who are looking for what you're offering can find you. Now, visibility can look like word of mouth. It can look like referrals from pastors, therapists, churches. It can be as simple as being listed in a directory. It could be hosting retreats or workshops so people kind of get a flavor of what you're offering. Maybe it's networking within your community, building relationships with the audience that you're looking to serve. Maybe it's a simple website. Maybe it's occasionally posting on social media. You don't need all of these. You just need one or two that you feel like align with your personality and something that would feel authentic to you and also aligns with the energy that you have. Um, and so here are the three questions, and then we'll move on to the next pillar. Where are the people that I feel called to serve already gathering? Where or what form of visibility feels most natural to me? And what feels sustainable? What's something that you can do consistently? You're like, oh, I can go to that, um, you know, I can go to that or offer a workshop for my church, or I could go to this event where pastors are meeting and they're talking about things that they're building in their congregation. Wherever the people that you feel called to serve already are, if you go there and you're having conversations with those people, there will be conversations that open up and you'll have an opportunity to share about what you're doing, but it doesn't have to be in a salesy way. It can just be in a, hey, I'm offering this. Would that be something you're interested in? And it can be very natural. It doesn't have to be, I don't know. I feel like we have, at least I did, had this like mental block of like, oh, I don't want to be like selling myself, but it's just an invitation, inviting people to come in and to experience what you're offering. All right, our next one is boundaries. And this is all about, you've clarified your season, built your foundation, thought about compensation and made yourself visible. And now boundaries is what protects your capacity because you won't be sustainable if you're constantly overextended. I feel like this is another one where we can feel uncomfortable, especially because, at least for me, growing up, I received a lot of messages around ministry work that you always go the extra mile and you always, do the extra thing. And so having boundaries can feel hard sometimes or feel like that you're not caring for another person. But boundaries are so important because it's also what's going to protect your capacity to be with other people well. In spiritual direction, we hold so much, grief and longing and confusion, and also, like celebration and joy, people's questions about God. And all of that require emotional and spiritual capacity for us to hold for them. And so when we talk about boundaries, it's not even like, okay, how many directees could I fit into my calendar? It's like, how many people can I hold well? And there are three kinds of capacity that I want to invite you to consider. There's time capacity, there's just like the amount of time on your calendar. There's emotional capacity, which maybe feels less obvious, but there are some seasons where maybe you're walking through something really difficult. Maybe you're in a season of caregiving. Maybe you're in a season of personal loss or a major transition where your emotional capacity is already being drawn upon. And so, to give a little bit more space for that is something to be aware of. And administrative capacity, even 8 directees, 6 directees, 4 directees, like they generate emails, scheduling, bookkeeping, follow up, all of those things. And so to just keep in mind that it's not just that like the hour session that you're with a directee, that there are other types of capacity to think about. And I would say too, from my experience, and this is more from missions as well, that like when people burn out, it's not because they don't love it. It's not because they don't feel a calling to it. It's because their boundaries didn't match the season that they were in. And so for this, um, I just want to share this kind of like what a boundary practice looks and feels like, where you finish sessions with energy. You're not resentful or anxious. You're not rushing from one conversation to the next, and you have space to process your own life or the things that are coming up in spiritual direction. All right, I feel like maybe this is like a fire hose of information. I feel like I maybe should just stop. I will just make a note on the last one. The last pillar is just ongoing care, inviting you to not do it alone. I feel like, especially spiritual direction, I feel like it's becoming more um, common, I guess, like that people are more aware of what it is. But there's so many people that I talk to that don't even know what spiritual direction is. And so when you're building a practice, it can feel isolating. And so I just want to encourage you, as part of like this practice, to be intentional about the way that you are receiving support. And I feel like there's probably, I'm sure there's more, but these are the three that I feel like are foundational. Supervision, of course. And I know that, that it's a big part. I love that about Center Quest. There's such a big focus on supervision. Peer community. I love, like, for example, everyone showing up tonight. I think that's so great. It's like, oh, there's other people that are um, in my community that understand what we're offering and what we're doing and what are the unique challenges of what we're building and offering. A place to remember you're not alone in this, and then ongoing formation. And of course, you guys know CenterQuest is always offering ongoing trainings and offerings and things like that. There's Spiritual Directors International, peer supervision. There's so many options, but I just want to encourage you to make a commitment to yourself and to the directees that you serve, that you will stay in a situation of ongoing care. All right, I'm gonna stop there, way over time, but thank you all. I could talk for hours and hours. I'm going to end there and see what
Thank
questions there are.
you so much, Nicole. That was such good information. I told Nicole when I looked through all this, Nicole, you can take your screen
Oh,
share off
yeah,
so that we could
yeah,
see everybody. I was like,
perfect.
I'm worried you're going to give away too much. And she was like, oh no, I have way more than that. I was like, okay, good. So don't feel like that for her. Don't feel scared because there's a lot more where that came from. Wow. Wow. I've been a spiritual director for like 11 years now, and there's definitely things I had not thought about. Like one thing that stood out to me was just the flow, like kind of
Mm,
naming like how does somebody maybe get referred from our CenterQuest referral network to meeting with me? Like what's that process and how kind and considerate and ministering a clear process for me would be and for the people
mm,
that come to me, like where the medium can match the message
yeah.
more. That's really inspiring to me. Okay, what do other people want to ask or say? There's no such thing as a stupid question. We're all over the spectrum in terms of having like a practice versus meeting with people versus informally companioning people. So don't feel
Mhm.
embarrassed or weird about wherever you are on that spectrum.
I
Kareen.
had two questions.
Oh, Leslie, and then
I'm sorry.
Kareen.
Oh no, oh, okay. Um, so two questions. Can you speak to either you or Vanessa or anybody else speak about what do you do when you realize you're meeting with someone and it's not a good fit? You don't feel like you can really support them in the way they need. That's one question, and I'll think of the other one in a second. Sorry,
Yeah, I would
exhausted
say,
there.
Vanessa, would you want to speak to that? I mean, I have some thoughts, but I think that you probably would be able to speak much better to that.
Yeah, that's really good awareness. And it's a hard awareness to come to, but it is kinder to the person to have the courage as the director to say something sooner rather than later to free them to pursue a director who might be a better fit.
Mhm.
That's a tension because some of us think like, well, whoever God brings to our door must be someone we should minister to in this way. But when it isn't a good fit, then you're not providing the kind of accompaniment. It'll affect your contemplative
Mhm.
posture and ability to stay with them. So,
Mhm.
getting help from a supervisor about how to craft that conversation sensitively would be a great idea. And then having a good referral option for them. Like we have a CenterQuest shareable referral network with a lot of us on there, but even identifying like two or three people for that specific person, like these are who come to
Mhm.
mind for me, for you.
Mhm. Mhm.
That sets them up to not kind of feel like stupid or ashamed or something like that, and to take the next step to get connected.
Great.
Would you add anything, Will, or others? No. Okay.
And my second question, really quickly,
Yes.
is what I've been experiencing as when I have an introductory meeting with someone, and this is in the evangelical community, they have a hard time understanding what spiritual direction is. And so I'm just curious what other people share with folks when they meet with them. I'm assuming I said some of the same things, but I just want to make sure and just hear, how do you introduce your process with people?
Nice.
Oh, I'll see. Yeah, if anyone else that's been doing this for like Vanessa, 11 years. I know Luisa, you've been doing this a long time. Deb, you've been doing this, I know, since we graduated. How do you guys go about that?
Leslie, there are two pamphlets that SDI provide.
Okay.
What is spiritual direction brochure, and the other one is what to expect from Christian spiritual direction. You can order them by bulk, and it's cheap.
Okay.
And normally, I would give that, you know, right away for them to
Okay.
look at, even before we do the first consultation question. It basically answers all
Perfect.
of the questions that normally people would ask. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Anybody else want to say something about that?
When I would say too, it would be interesting, especially from, I don't necessarily have an answer of like, oh, this is exactly what I would say, but it would be interesting if there's something as you work with people and you feel like you find a way that resonates to kind of document that and that that's part of your flow, you would say that you would maybe write your own thing and say like, oh, this is the kind of background and the context of the people that I'm serving come from. And these are kind of the questions that they have, or maybe a
Mhm.
metaphor that they could relate with. And then that you make that part of your process.
That's a
Great.
great idea. Okay, Corrine, we could talk. That's such an interesting question, Leslie. I want to hear
Mhm.
everybody on it, but we'll take a few more questions.
Uh, yeah, thanks. My question was actually similar to Leslie's, but
Mm,
as an extension to that, I just wanted to ask if it's normal practice to kind of have an initial chat with a potential directee. And then from that initial chat, you sort of get a sense of whether you can connect or not. Or is that not a good way to start? And if, let's say, at first instance, you feel already that there isn't that there's just no vibe, no connection,
mm-hmm,
then, is it ethical to step away from that already,
mm-hmm,
or should we still just continue with
mm-hmm,
one session or two and allow things to unfold before arriving at a decision if it actually confirms with your initial impression?
mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'll jump in just from my perspective, and then anyone else can say more. I would say from my personal perspective that giving like a short, maybe 30-minute consultation call at the beginning is a really good idea, especially because of the nature of spiritual direction work. It's so deep, it's so personal. I do feel like you have to have kind of a good connection with the person for it to be effective. And so I would say that that's a really good thing. And then also to, as you meet, we've done so much work in CenterQuest. We're all, trained through CenterQuest around discernment. And I would say to trust yourself. Like if there's something that you feel is not kind of, not a good fit, I feel like in a consultation call, that's a great time to say, oh, I'm not sure if this is going to be the best fit with what you're looking for. I would encourage you to reach out to one of these. And I think that's the power of having other people that you can refer them to, because then you don't feel like that you're leaving them, you know what I mean, without any recourse. You're giving another option. But I would say definitely if you feel like there's not quite that there's something that's off, that it would be kinder to be clear on the front end. I don't know. What would you add to that, Vanessa?
That was really well said. And Corinne, you just demonstrated lots of thoughtfulness and discernment even in the question.
Hmm.
So, the idea of maybe having a sense initially, like, I don't even think this is going to be a good fit no matter what, versus like, "Look, why don't we try a session and we both think and pray about it, and then we connect to see if we want to go forward." That is one stage of the discernment as well.
Hmm.
Corinne,
Well, you will talk more about this. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
oh, it's okay. Oh, we we do have a nuts and bolts video that we will ask you to preview before our session because we want to concentrate more on the Q&A. But in my more than 20 years of practice, the one thing that has worked for me, but may not work for everybody, of course, but I actually use the grand examine, which means whenever somebody comes to me, I tell them, I want to have 4 sessions with you consecutively. At the fourth session, let's discern mutually whether this is a good fit. It has always worked for me because I give them an out and I give myself an out. If after the 4 sessions of looking back and looking through and looking forward and looking around, I would get a sense whether, oh, I want to work with this person or this person feels like, we're a good match and all that. So it has worked for me except one instance. Only one instance in all of those 20 years. It's like, I don't know what happened to it, but for the most part, it has served my purpose. So, which I will discuss during the nuts and bolts, how to use the grand examine as a discernment piece before you commit long range, before you even sign an agreement, or before you even fill out an intake form. It's like 4 sessions. And I just charge basically a flat fee for all 4 sessions. And I tell them up front that this is not your typical spiritual direction, but this will be a discernment, process.
Let's take, yeah, that is
That's
such a cool
wonderful.
thing.
Yeah.
Let's take one more question.
Can I ask a
Yeah.
question
Yeah.
about the insurance that you mentioned? Because
Hmm.
that has kind of flitted through my brain a lot. I don't look at my practice as a business and I don't present it as a business. But I have been sometimes concerned about uh, what might happen if somebody got upset about something. But I would have no idea what kind of insurance, like what are you talking about when you're talking about insurance?
Well, and that's like um, I yeah, I can't remember what the website is. I'm going to find it and I can put that in the notes for it. But it's just like a liability insurance. Like if someone were to be upset and to sue your practice, that you would have protection from that.
I think Louisa can address that briefly because she's
Yes,
done that before.
please.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, please.
Yes. Um, I am aware that it has happened to a fellow colleague, Deborah, and all of you that you come across someone who maybe has significant mental health issues and they're just hmm, difficult people. I'll say that. So the American Professional Agency offers um, wonderful coverage just in case someone decides to bring a lawsuit of some kind or says they've suffered, emotional damage or something like that. Um, I think I pay around $180 a year for over $1 million worth of coverage. And they have a lower fee to begin with, and then they kind of bump it up year by year. But that is an excellent idea. And it is just in case, but you just never know. It is under the umbrella of clergy or someone who is engaged in offering ministry. They have a category for it.
Thanks so
Yes.
much, Louisa. I put that
Yeah.
link in the chat.
Good.
Okay, well, it would be so fun to keep talking about this, but we're going to just share a few announcements and then bless you into your evenings and your days.
First of all, Nicole, thank you so very much for all that you have offered to us. Hopefully, in the future, we can have a series where we can segmentize, all the different facets and all that. And yeah, we do have like initial nuts and bolts, but with your permission, I will use your recording as a supplement to what we have. But on behalf of CenterQuest, my profound gratitude for your time, investment of energy and effort, and the wisdom and the insights you've shared for us today. So let me just walk through just a very few announcements, quick announcements, which probably, hopefully, will register in your radar because they're important to us. First is we have a soul companioning course coming up May 4 to 30, which would be under the Soul Companioning International, and the deadline for registration would be April 22nd. So please pass the word around. By the way, our Soul Companioning courses are great avenues to get directees, because they're always looking for spiritual directors that we can, refer. The second one offering would be CQ Asia, which will be August 3 to 29, and the deadline for signing up will be July 20. And of course, our basic intro trilogy will be offered twice, one in June to July and one in September. For those of you who are finished with SC and are looking to fulfill the other prerequisite, although this BIT is open to all. Lastly, I just want to make mention about the fact that our regular applications still open until the end of July, and we still have 14 spots open for Cohort 2. And I'd like to also announce that Cohort 2 is unique in that Cohort 2 is welcoming North Americans, non-Asians, international applicants to join us for CQ Asia. So everybody